It's not me. I know I'm a vessel. I'm somebody that's got to do the teaching, the speaking, and that's just my position that I have to take that has been given unto me. But what we should be coming forward and to hear is to hear from the Spirit and to hear the Word. The Word and the Spirit, you can't separate His Spirit from His Word, and you cannot separate the Son that became flesh. The Word became flesh. You can't separate that from the Spirit nor from the Word. It says they all bear the same record up in heaven. So there is no discrepancy. There is no division. It's all one. And so that's what we should be wanting to hear from is the Word and to hear His Spirit. So I was doing some thinking and meditating um, as I was studying on today, and for it's been a few days now, on the fact that even the greatest men of the book, when we open up our book and we start reading about some of these great men of faith, great women, but one thing they all had in common was they had a teacher. They all had a teacher. They had somebody that would teach them the word, teach them the commandments, teach them the statutes, teach them the precepts. We have the prophets, and the prophets was getting the word directly from the Most High. And a lot of times the word that they got from the Most High was words of warning. There's not too many times there are times where the prophet would give you some glad tidings, some good tidings. We see a lot of that in Isaiah, but also in Isaiah we see a lot of warnings. We see the prophecy of the end. We see how it's going to be on the new heaven and the new earth, and all throughout the book, you have men who have teachers. So everybody's got to have a teacher, and he says in Jeremiah 3:15, I will give you shepherds according to my heart that will feed you with knowledge and understanding. Feed you with knowledge and understanding. And so you look at Elijah, and you had Elisha. You look at Jesus Christ, and he taught all his disciples. You see Peter, you see John, you see some of the other ones. He was the teacher. He taught them. And you see Paul, who was one born out of due season, but Paul sat at the feet of Gamaliel. When you look at Brother Paul, his teacher was Gamaliel. You look at Timotheus and Titus, and their teacher was Brother Shaul, Brother Paul. So everybody has a teacher, and we are the product of our teacher. We are the products of our teacher, and I've had several teachers that when I get into study and into my meditation, a lot of times I hear the voice and I recall the teaching that I've gotten from the men in my life, those who have taught me, and even the women as well. And so I've sat at the feet of some great teachers, in my opinion. And I'm sure everybody would say, well, I sat at the feet of great teachers too. I mean, everybody wants to say that. But we are the offspring of our teacher, and our teacher usually gives us, he teaches us knowledge. The things and materials and stuff that he teaches us becomes our knowledge and our knowledge base. And it grows, and many times we get wisdom through the teaching. We get an understanding. But a teacher does not give revelation. A teacher can teach what he and she knows, What they teach, what they know. A teacher can be given a revelation, and they can teach that revelation. But the receiver, the pupil of the teacher, can get an understanding of the revelation, but not necessarily have a revelation. We see that even us. John was given the revelation of Jesus Christ. He was given the revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, if you read through Revelation, some of it's very difficult to understand. Now, he had received the revelation, and even the angel, he even talked to him, because even, I believe it's the 17th chapter or the 18th chapter, he said he marveled at the great whore. He just kind of looked, and he was just, and the angel says, "Why do you marvel? I'll tell you who she is, and I'll tell you plainly, so that you would know." And it even gives us a lot of clues, and it talks about the city that sits on 7 hills, and the city that is renowned for sitting on 7 hills. We're talking about Rome. Now, it doesn't come right out and say Rome, Italy, in Revelation. It just says it's the city that sits on 7 hills. Well, the city that sits on 7 hills is Rome. So some of us can read and try to understand a revelation, but don't actually have the revelation. Well, there's a lot of things that we can be taught, but we just don't have the revelation of it. And then revelation, where does that revelation come from? Well, it comes from our Father in heaven. We have the example in the 16th chapter of Matthew, when he asked the disciples, "Whom do men say that I am?" And then he said, "Well, who do you say that I am?" And then as Peter said, "Thou art the Christ. You're the Mashiach. You're the anointed one, the only begotten of the Father." He says, "You are the Christ, the Son of Elohim." And Jesus responded with, "Flesh and blood did not give that to you." Even though, listen to this now, even though Peter sat at the feet of Jesus, did he not? He was at the feet of Jesus. He was a pupil of Jesus. Jesus was his teacher that was teaching him. And Jesus did not say, "I gave that to you, Peter." That's not what he said. He said, "You did not receive that from flesh and blood. You got that from my Father in heaven." That's where you got that from. That revelation then came from heaven. And a lot of us don't have revelation. We have understanding through our teachers. And being fed knowledge and understanding. That's how we learn. That's how we gather. That's how I know. Most of the book that I know is through my teachers. But then there comes a time where the Spirit can speak to you, and it's no private interpretation. Somebody off here got a private interpretation. No, it ain't no private interpretation. The revelation that you get with the book must be according to, excuse me, I'm sorry. The revelation that you get must be built on biblical principles and the foundation of the book from the beginning going through to the end. Nobody's going to get a revelation that is independent or abstract from this book. This is the book that, for example, the Hebrews, he said he was the Elohim of the Hebrews. We read that in Exodus when he told Moshe to go and tell Pharaoh, "I'm your Elohim." After he demonstrates through the plagues the great power that he has, in the 4th chapter of Deuteronomy, it says, if you walk in these statutes and commandments and be obedient to me, what are the other nations are going to say? Thou art a wise and what? Understanding people. And they're going to say, what kind of people is this that has the Elohim, which is all powerful, that there's no God that has more power than our Elohim. So that has the Elohim that is so close to him that they can call on him and he answers. That was the envy of the world. I don't know if you guys realize it, but that was the envy of the known world, that this pocket of people that came from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob's name was changed to Israel. They came out of Egypt, which was a mighty great. I mean, Egypt back in that day, I mean, we look at ourselves here, United States of America, as a world power, do we not? I mean, we're dominant on the world stage. We say that we are a world power. There's no greater nation than us. That's, so if you look at it in that context and you look at Egypt, Egypt was like that. It was a world power, it was a world leader. There was no rival to Egypt. So you had a people who came out of Egypt, and all the other nations envy this nation. He said, in Ezekiel the 16th chapter, he said, I didn't choose you because you was a greater nation than anybody else. That's not why I chose you. He said, I chose you. You were nothing. You was polluted in your own blood. I chose you in your nativity. So all the other nations were envious of the Hebrews, of the Israelites. They were envious of them. They feared them. They really feared them. And whenever they can gain power or control over them, you know what they did? They did it. If they were able to subdue them and to capture them and hold them in captivity, they did it. And we see the story that's in the Bible. As we look at history, we see how many times they were in captivity. But do we know why they went into captivity? Do we know why they went into captivity? Well, because of their disobedience, and they forsook, the Most High. They didn't keep his law, statutes, and commandments, and that cost them. That cost them dearly. And the other nations, they seen how this was a very special people, and then they had a book. They had a book, they had scrolls, they had prophets and prophecy. I mean, I'm just trying to build a picture and kind of see if you can see a small nation, but they had the prophecy of the world and the end time. So what do you think other nations wanted then? What do you think other nations wanted? Not only did they want to subdue them, but they wanted to take their book. They wanted to take their book. And they, to a certain degree, they were successful, because when they took over when they captured them and subdued them, then they took their book and they forced them to teach them their book. And then you had the transliteration from the Hebrew into the other different languages around the land and around the people at that time. That pattern continued to go on even after Christ. Even after Christ, even after our Messiah, that pattern went on. Why are you saying that? What's the importance of that? Because all of this book, when you pick up that Bible, when you pick up the Bible and you start reading from Genesis, and you can go all the way to Revelation, this book, he had chosen a people. It's throughout this book. He had chosen a people to be his people. And there was other nations who wanted to be that. I mean, if you're envious of something, what do you do? If you're envious or if you're jealous, what would you do? Would you take what somebody has? We see that a lot of times when people are envious of somebody, or if you got something and I want it, I'm going to take it from you, especially if I'm stronger than you. I mean, if I could, manhandle you and bind you up and take what I want from you, that's what I'm going to do. And what Israel had was desirous of other nations. And so when they went into their captivity, those other nations attempted to take what they had. And it's very evident today. Even to this day that we're living, it's very evident that other nations have taken what belonged to the Hebrews and the Israelites, and then presented it to the world through their understanding. And this is why it's critical, very critical and important to have been taught this book from the teacher of the book. And our Father in heaven understood the relevancy and the importance of how it was supposed to be taught from one generation to the next generation. He knew the power in generational teaching. And for many of us, we don't see it like that. That's not important to us. The responsibility of our teachers to teach, and it starts in the home. The parental responsibility, and then you had those in the nation that were called the seers or the prophets that was supposed to teach. It's very, very important that we get an understanding of the book. It's very important, because absent of an understanding and absent of getting a revelation of the book that's all in here, it's going to be, I'm not going to say you can't be saved, but you're just going to be skewed. I heard somebody say a few days back, when they were talking about space and how they had to, the data they had to collect, when they were trying to get to the moon. They wanted to get to the moon, and they said that if they were off just a certain degree, they would miss the moon by so much. So it was so critical to be precise. They had to be precise in their calculations, because they could be off 2 or 3 degrees, and you could be off 2 or 3 degrees here on Earth, and then miss it, really miss it. So even the minute things was very critical if you have to hit your target. And even in our book, it's important that we have an understanding. It's all throughout, the Proverbs. When you want to be enriched with Proverbs, it talks about the importance of understanding. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom. But in all thy getting, get an understanding. I have to understand. I've got to understand this book, because it's given to us so that we can understand it. So I just wanted to say those things to prepare our minds on this book. Now tonight I want to talk about something that and it's not something that I received. It's not my own, but it's something that is taught in the seminaries that I think will be helpful. Now, I'm not putting my name on this, but I think this would be helpful after doing some study on it. I think it'll be helpful, because we're of the day now to where we want to be, when you think of church or the body, several things come to your mind. Now for us, when we think of the church and the body, we think of, and the reason why we go to church, I want to go to church because I want to be, quote unquote, saved. That's what we say. I want to be saved. So that's why I go to church. That's why I listen to the teaching. That's why I want to be obedient, because I want salvation. I'm in this to win it. I heard somebody say that a few days ago. We're in it to win it. The reason why we're here is because we don't want to be lost. You have some people that say, the reason why I go to church, I don't want to go to hell. The reason why I love them, because I don't want to be lost. The reason why I'm obedient You know, the reason why I come to the altar, the reason why I repented and got baptized in Jesus' name, got filled with the Holy Ghost, because I don't want to be lost. I don't want to be lost. I don't want to go to hell. And that's usually what we say. I don't want to go to hell. I love him, and I'm going to be obedient to him because I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to die that death. I choose life. You know, I choose life. And so we have to, you know, when you have that understanding, you know, what is salvation? What is salvation? And because it says, first I want to go to John 4:22. First, I want to go to John 4:22. Ye worship, ye know not what. We know what we worship. For salvation is of the Jews. And I'm glad I see some pencil and paper, because I'm going to ask you to write some things down, because I think it was pretty rich. At least I think so. After you write it down and look at it, maybe you'll come to that. You'll reach that conclusion. Maybe not. That's entirely up to you. But Jesus said, and he pointed toward where salvation was going to be. If you doubt the words of Christ, or if you don't believe the words of Christ, then you're in the wrong place. You're just in the wrong place. Everything he spoke, it says in the 6th chapter of St. John, he said, my words are spirit and my words are life. My words are life. My words are spirit. You know, he didn't pull any punches. He didn't have to retract. He didn't have to recoil a statement. There's nothing that he said we have to redact. He said it plainly. He said it directly, forwardly, and he said it purely. And every word, it even says here, I think it was Mary, wasn't it? She just sat at his feet just to listen to every word that rolled off his lips. I mean, hey, you ain't moving me. I'm listening to every single word that comes off his lips. I've got to, and then we, you know, something you heard me say it, I've repeated it several times, but even in the book of Job, Job found his word meant more to him than his necessary food. You know, I always, you know, I keep that, and you know, there's a lot of scriptures that float around in my head, but just to know how certain men of this book felt about the word, you know, because you see people today, they don't have that same desire, that motivation, that endearment to his word is not like it is to some of the people that we read about. You know, when he compared the word, you know, to his necessary food, and you ain't got, I don't know anybody, you know, that goes on a voluntary hunger strike that don't want to eat. Now, you might know somebody because they're out there. There are some people out there that will do that. I'm saying I don't know them. I don't know them. Everybody that I know personally enjoys eating. Everybody does. You know, I just enjoy eating, you know, because food tastes good. But Job said, his word meant more to him than his necessary food. I know I have to eat to survive. I have to eat to survive. But his word means more to me than my actual eating to survive. Now, how many people have that endearment towards his word? I mean, if a lot of us had that endearment towards his word, you know, churches would be filled up. You couldn't keep enough, you know, pews or seats in the church because I got to hear his word. I got to hear his word. It's more important. People would sacrifice. They would sacrifice to the teaching of his word. They would sacrifice for it. You don't see that. You don't see that endearment. You don't see that that energy around wanting to hear the word. People don't find it as necessary to them as their diets and their food. But one thing that Jesus had said that throughout his ministry, everything that he spoke of, you could find that in the writings that predated him. His whole life actually was given unto us through the prophets, through Moses, through King David, King Solomon. I mean, all of these men, the prophets Elijah and Elisha, Samuel, we see them talking about our Savior, our Redeemer, our Messiah. We see the purpose of him coming. The reason why he actually had to come to this earth was because the people he had chosen to be his representations in the world. He said, I've chosen you as a nation, and I don't want you to be like the nation that I've called you out of, and I don't want you to be like all those nations where you're going. You're going to represent me, and all nations are going to look at you and know that you represent me. I'm going to be in you. And you're going to be the light. He said that they were going to be the light of the world. Well, what happened? I mean, he's not. Hopefully we can see, because I'm going to go on for a few Bible classes, but he's not going back on what he has already prophesied is going to happen. You and I still have to live out some of the prophecies of this book, because he's not going back on it. Let's go to, let's keep this verse in mind, but then let's go to Malachi 3 and verse 6. Malachi 3 and 6. He says, for I am Yah, I change not. I'm not changing. I ain't going to change. Don't think you can persuade. Because sometimes we want to persuade the Most High to change. It's if we don't agree with it or if we don't like it. Yeah, I read that, but I don't like it. I don't even like the way that's worded. I'm kind of offended by his word. So I want to, there's some things I want to redact in this book, and there's some things that I just don't agree with. So I'm just not going to, we'll just skim over it. I learned today as I was studying different versions of the book, because there's a lot of different versions of the book. And the version that I teach from is the King James Version. And this is the version that I teach from. This is not the only version. They had books out before the King James. They still have writings of the Greek and the Latin, and I would imagine even some of the English, because I was looking at Wycliffe and as I was going through some verses, and I wonder how Wycliffe said this. How did Tyndale say this? Because they predated, their writings predated King James. One thing we have to be careful of is we can't make King James King Jesus. We have to be careful of that. So as I'm studying, and the first book that I go to, first version I go to is the King James Version. But I'm also incorporating other versions in, because there were some versions of the book that predates King James. King James came out 1611. There was other books that was written before that. So my referencing, as I reference, and I'm referencing different versions. But I found out today that there was a couple of versions that excluded some things that was in the King James. And I thought, man, that's kind of, how I felt like I was cheated. I know, so I go back and I reference the King James. I know I sit in the King James. I see in the King James, then I go back and they'll leave it out. They just purposely, conveniently left things out. And that's because some people read this book, and if they don't like something, they just won't. I just won't say it. I don't like it. We won't talk about it. I mean, we see some of that in our political arena today, and in the educational institution, because a lot of people don't want to teach critical race theory. Let's stay away from it. Let's not talk about it. We don't want to talk about the past. We don't want to talk. It's too divisive. So they just want to brush over it. Let's not talk about it. That doesn't change anything. And as I was looking today, and there's a couple versions, and I thought, well, why didn't you? But it don't change anything. You're not going to change. You can close this book and never open it for the rest of your life because you don't like what's in it. Is that going to change anything? That's not going to change a thing. He says, I'm the Most High. He said, I change not. There's nothing about me that's going to change. Now, why do you think there's nothing about him that's going to change? Because he's already determined how this is going to be from the very beginning. So all of this, I mean, even in his mind, now we're not elevated. We're not at that place to where we know his mind. We know a little bit of his mind because of the spirit that he gives us, which is a down payment for us to prepare us for the kingdom to come. But we don't know his mind. We want to learn more about him. But there's a lot of things about him that is absent to us that we can't reach up to that level. Okay. Did he not say in the book of Isaiah that his thoughts were above our thoughts and his ways above our ways? As far as what? The heavens are from the earth. So is his ways above our ways and his thoughts above our thoughts. So we can't reach up to that level. He has to drip it down. It drips down unto us, and it's called revelation. He drips it down. So he's not changing nothing. Everything that is written in this book is solid. There was a song out years ago, Solid as a Rock. It's solid. I mean, it ain't going nowhere. It's in fact, and I was looking at that version. It left out some things, but my Bible says that it's already written in heaven. It says his word is forever settled in heaven. So I don't care if you don't like it. I don't care. We're not going to read that. Well, we just won't even put that in the book. It's not going to change anything. It's just not going to change anything. And a lot of people, they run from things that's not very comfortable or conducive to their belief, how they believe things. If it's not conducive to how I believe, then I don't give it no shine. So he says here, he's not going to change. So when Jesus said, back to John 4 and 22, and help me, I don't want to be too long-winded, but he said, ye worship you know not what. We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. So people say, I come to church because I want to be saved. I want to be saved. I don't want to go to hell. And so Jesus tells us, well, I'm going to tell you what salvation. Now, for us, our understanding of salvation has to mean the same thing as the Bible. Because if we have a different understanding of what salvation is compared to what the Bible teaches, then we're going to find ourselves a little off base. Many of us have played baseball before. We played baseball to where you can lead off first base or second base, and you can lead off so you can get a good jump when the ball is hit, or if you want to threaten to steal a base. So you get a little lead off there, but if you're not paying attention, the ball can get back to first base. The pitcher can throw it back to the first baseman and catch you off base before you can get back on the base and be safe. And a lot of times with our understanding here, if we don't have the correct understanding, we can start leading off and start going in a direction, and then before we can get to a place of safety to where we're not put out, it's too late. The ball is thrown, you're tagged out. You know, you got off base, and you got too far off base, and you wasn't able to get back. And so we have to be careful if our understanding of salvation is not what the Bible teaches. It has to be what the Bible teaches. And if it's not what the Bible teaches, and so as I read through Paul's all his letters, I read through Paul and his letters, and I'm still, and I'll read them again, but Paul does not give us a revelation or a lifestyle or living anywhere but on the earth. Now, that might make some people upset, but you study Paul for yourself. I mean, all his letters, Romans, because we'll look at some scriptures in Romans, and maybe First Thessalonians. But you look at all Paul's writings, and you won't see him talking about salvation that teaches you how to live or how you're going to live in heaven. It's not there. It's not there. Throughout all his teachings, Paul is teaching you about how you live where? Right here. Right here. He teaches you how you live right here. And a lot of times in our understanding of salvation, we're looking at being in heaven. And you know, so where does that come? Well, you have to go to Revelation. And doesn't Revelation talk about it? And doesn't Revelation talks about the saints and those who are going to reign with him. And it says in Revelations plainly, and they shall reign with him on earth. Plainly. I mean, it can't be any simpler than that. But to a lot of people, I don't. Well, you can live here on earth, but I'm gonna be in heaven. But you don't have no. Well, so I'm going to try to explain, and I'm going to use a little help in this class because I didn't come up with all of this, but I am studying this, and I'm going to put my own little footprint on it, or my own little fingerprint on it. But he says salvation is of the Jews, all right? So what is salvation? What is salvation? And on this verse here, now I'm going to go to the Koine Greek, which is in the Strong's Concordance, and I'm going to look up that word salvation, which is G 4991. I think they could put that up there on the scriptures if you just call it down, G 4991 for salvation. And the word for salvation is soteria. Soteria. So in the Koine Greek, what the writer says when he's writing this book, he says soteria is of the Jews. So what is soteria? Now in English we say salvation. In Greek we get the English word salvation from the Greek word soteria. So what is it? So is it up there? What does it mean? Okay, you have a derivative as properly abstract noun. Soteria means to rescue. It means safety. Physically or morally. It means to deliver. It means health. You mean soteria means health? So soteria is of the Jews. Salvation, save, saving. And I want to be saved. When I say I want to be saved, what I'm saying is I want to be rescued. I want to be delivered. That's what I want. I want deliverance. Then it comes to what do I want to be rescued from? What do I want to be delivered from? And then the what we go back to is, well, I want to be delivered, and some people say, I want to be delivered from myself. I want to be saved from myself. I want to be rescued from myself. Some say, well, I want to be rescued from sin. I want to be, I want to be saved from sin. That's what I want to be saved from, And so this is what I want everybody to write down, and I'll give you a minute to write this down. So when we look at salvation, so we're going to look at three things of salvation. Salvation, and this probably is the most important one, is because we want to be saved from sin. So when you say salvation or soteria, salvation from the penalty of sin. We want salvation from the penalty of sin. Why do you want salvation from the penalty of sin? Why do we want that? Let's go to Ezekiel 18 and verse number 4. Now this was given before Christ. It was given before Christ. And so the reason why Christ had to come is because his chosen people, what did they do? What did his chosen people do? They were disobedient. They broke covenant, and then they transgressed what? His law. His law. They're guilty. In the eyes of our, before I go, okay, let's look at this one. In the eyes of our Father and Jesus Christ, they look at sin as transgressing against him. That's what sin is. If we can't see what sin is, it's going to be difficult. Ezekiel 18 and 4. Behold, all souls are mine. As the soul of the Father, so also the soul of the Son is mine. The soul that sinneth, what's going to happen? It shall die. Now, we were, for a few classes, we were talking about soul and what the soul is. And we're finding out that the soul is, I'm looking at souls right now. The soul is you in the Hebrew, nefesh. And nefesh deals with your character. It deals with, we can look it up. Let's go into the ancient Hebrew lexicon here, and it's H5315, and it's nefesh. And so in the ancient Hebrew lexicon Bible, it's 2424, N in parentheses, right? See that? So let's go down to N. And nefesh is soul. Soul, what else does it mean? Life. It means the person. It means the mind. It means the heart, the creature. It means your body. So when we look at the body, and that's why, and I try to bring it out in another class, that's why it's so critical at what Paul was saying, that he begged them that you would present your bodies what? A living sacrifice, and it's supposed to be holy and acceptable, because your body is a part of your soul. And a lot of people think, well, it don't matter what I put on my body, it's what's in my heart. You don't understand what nefesh is. Because see, we're looking at it through a lens or a perspective of a Greek or a Roman who it wasn't given to. Because the Hebrew understanding of nefesh is all of this. It's the body, it's the dead, it's your will. Your will. It's your desire. It's the man. Self, that self there is dealing with your conscience. And we have a conscience and we have a subconscious. And there's a lot of things. I mean, our subconscious doesn't sleep, right? So we can load up a lot of stuff in our conscious mind, then we go to sleep. Our subconscious is still alive, still kicking. And then we wonder why, man, I'm having all these weird dreams. Horror. I mean, just all kind of just wicked stuff. Well, you got to be careful what you feed your conscience, because your conscience, you can load your conscience up with a lot of things, and then you go to sleep. That subconscious is still kicking. So that self is dealing with your conscience. It says any, and then it says appetite. Even your appetite is a part of your soul. It's a part of your soul. Now, I brought out before that in the Greek, you know what they call the soul in the Greek? I brought that out. A few classes, in a couple of classes, I was dealing with what the Greek called the soul. What did the Greek call the soul? Similar almost, but what did they Greek? When you go to the Greek, do we have to go to the New Testament? Okay. In the New Testament, in the Greek, in the Koine Greek, soul is psyche. Psyche. And so when you think of the psyche, you're thinking of the mind, or the ability to think, what you think about and what you dwell on, and your psyche, your intelligence. But in the Hebrew context, in the Hebrew, which it was given to the Hebrews, it's more than that. That's a part of it, because you got your mind, you got your will, you got your desires, you've got your body, you got your appetite. All of that is a part of your soul. So when we went to, and we didn't spend a lot of time there, but maybe in your time, Leviticus chapter 5, that chapter there, especially the first part of that chapter, it was talking about if the soul sin and hear. Remember, if the soul sin and speaks, if the soul sins and see, because that's a part of your soul. Your soul is the whole embodiment of who you are. So, but in Ezekiel, back to Ezekiel 18:4, he says, behold, all souls are mine, as the soul of the Father, so also the soul of the Son is mine. The soul that sinneth, it shall die. And now let's go to Daniel 9 and verse number 11. Because the understanding of what sin is, it's important that we know what sin is, because we're talking about salvation. I want to be saved from sin. Well, if you want to be saved from sin, or you want to be rescued, or if you want to be delivered, then you got to know what you need to be delivered from. You got to know what soteria is, because that's what it said in the Koine Greek, soteria. We say it in English. Our English language, we bring in our culture and our understanding. So our understanding and our language and our culture of what salvation is, in some parts, is different from the Bible. Because there's some things that are lost in translation. Daniel 9:11, yea, all Israel has transgressed thy law, even by departing, that they might not obey thy voice. Therefore the curse is poured upon us, and the oath that is written in the law of Moses, the servant of Elohim, because we have sinned against him. All, the whole nation. And what did he say? That the soul that sinneth, it's going to what? It's going to die. It's going to die. And he says all of us did. So everybody was in a state of transgression. Everybody was in a state of dying. Let's go to Romans real quick. Romans 6 and 23. For the wages of sin is death. So you got to pay for your transgression. There's a cost. There's a cost. And you don't have to worry about protesters. You don't have to worry about people carrying a sign. I didn't get my wage for sinning. You don't have to worry about that. You go, the soul that sinneth, it's going to die. That's a guarantee, because he said in Ezekiel, all souls are mine, but the soul that sinneth, it's going to die. The wages of sin is death. Now let's go to, and I'm going to finish up with that salvation from the penalty of sin. But let's go to 1 John chapter 3 and verse number 4. 1 John 3 and verse number 4. And it says, whosoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law. For sin is the transgression of the law. Now, didn't we read that? Centuries before John wrote this, right? Who said that? Centuries before John. Centuries. We're going back centuries. Huh? Ezekiel and Moses, but who we just read it? Daniel. He says we all transgress, all of us. All of us are transgressors. He says we all transgress thy law, all of us, because that's what sin is. Our Father in heaven tells us plainly what sin is. He tells us what sin is. It's all written in the teachings of Moses. And Jesus said, I'm not coming to destroy none of that. In fact, I'm going to fulfill it, because I'm going to tell you a little bit more. He said, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to put some meat on them bones. I'm going to try to clear up all the gray area. And for us to have an understanding of what he hates, and what he's given us a people that were supposed to do it and show the world how it's supposed to be done, but they didn't do it. So he sent his son, and his son came to pay the price, not for his sin, but for the sins of the people. So there had to be a price for sin. Somebody has to pay the price for sin. So salvation from the penalty of sin is justification. So I want you to write that down, because we started to write that before. Salvation from the penalty of sin is justification. Salvation from the penalty of sin is justification. And we know what justification is, right? One of the things we say is, just as if you didn't do it. Just as if you didn't do it. That's the justification that people, when they say, I'm saved, what are you saying? I'm saved from the penalty of sin, because I know the wages of sin is death. I know that, and I know that like Daniel said, all Israel have sinned. And sin is the transgression of his law. So if sin is the transgression of his law, do you think it's the same for other nations outside of Israel? It's just the same, because he has one law. And to him, to our Father in heaven, when he lays down the law, when he lays down the teachings, and this is how I want you to live, and you go against that, that's transgression. Wait a minute. I told you not to do that, and you did it anyway. Well, that's transgression. Now, he didn't tell us if you go over the speed limit that they established in the land, you're going to hell. He didn't say that. He didn't say that. You should obey the speed limit. It'd be better if you do. There's consequences. If you don't obey the speed limit, number one, you can get a ticket. Number two, you can lose control of your vehicle. You can injure or kill yourself or others. So there is a penalty for going over the speed limit, but it's not in my book. The speed limit is on Marquette. The speed limit is 25, then it graduates to 35. Now, if you go over that, you've transgressed my law. You're in danger of hellfire. That's not in this book. That's not in this book. Now, the city will come out and say, yeah, it's not in the Bible, but we wrote it, and if you violate it, you're gonna pay the penalty. So with our Father now, He teaches us things, and He wants us to obey things that is important to our soul, which we're trying to define what the soul is. He addresses the soul. He says, all souls are mine. He came to save our soul. So He came to save my body. He came to save my body. I don't care what people say. I don't care. It ain't what you put on. It's what's in your heart. Well, you don't understand what a soul is. Because when He looks at the soul, he's looking at your whole body. He's looking at your mind. He's looking at your heart. He's looking at your will. He's looking at your desires. He's looking at how you look at His law. That's why David said, I love thy law. That's what David said. I love thy law. I meditate on it. What? Day and night. Because I love it. I love it. So He knows your inner man, whether you're just speaking outwardly because it's a good show amongst people, or if it's really in the heart. Because He said, now we dealt with the outward part because we wrote it in tablets and on stone, and we put the book of law on outside of the ark because you already broke the covenant. So the book of the law is a witness against you that you broke the covenant. So all of that was written. But what was His intent with that? What was His intent to write it? What was His intent? When He says He wrote it on stone, tablets of stone. But what was His intent? What did He want to do? He said, I'm going to write it in your heart. I want it in your heart. I don't want you to have to open up a book and read. I want it in your heart. I don't want somebody to have to teach you to love me. I want you to have it in your heart to where you just love me. That you love my law. You love my precepts. You love my statutes. You love my commandments. Because He says the day's coming where ain't nobody going to teach you. Why? Because it's going to be in your heart. It's going to be in your heart. It should not be difficult for everybody who call themselves quote unquote Christian. It should not be difficult to teach them statutes, commandments, and the law. It shouldn't be, because they said they're born of His Spirit, and being born of His Spirit, He's writing His law in my heart. That means I love His law. I meditate on it. I don't have a problem with it. You can tell when there's friction there. When there's a little conflict, you can tell. And when people say, I've been delivered from the law, and like Paul says, you're no longer, and let's go to, let's look at that. Let's look at Romans 6, and let's look at 14. Now, I'm kind of getting, so 3 things I want you to write down before I go any further. Salvation from the penalty of sin is justification. Salvation from the power of sin is sanctification. Do we have that? Salvation from the power of sin is sanctification. And the third one, are we ready for the third one? I'll give you a second. Are we ready for the third one? Salvation from the presence of sin is glorification. So you have the penalty of sin, because sin brings a penalty. But he says that we can be justified from the penalty of sin. And that's what, one of the definitions of salvation is justification. Just as if I didn't do it. Because Paul says here, for sin shall not have dominion over you. And I was going to bring this verse out on the next one, salvation from the power of sin. This is one of the verses I'm going to bring out. For sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace. So the penalty for breaking the law was what? Death. But you had some sins, and we see that in, is it Peter or John? He says some sins are unto death and some sins are not unto death. Because studying the law, you had some sins that if you committed those sins, there was, the penalty of that sin was death right there. You could not do what? You couldn't bring a sacrifice. There was no sacrifice. There was some sins, transgressions of his law, where you could not bring a sacrifice. There's no sacrifice for that. You mean, wait a minute. What do you mean no sacrifice for that? I'm sorry for my sin. Oh, but the penalty of that is death. As I'm reading and studying and reading this book about ancient Near East customs and comparative to the Hebrew Old Testament. It's a book. I think it's very good. I like the author, and I'll probably get some more of his books. But the understanding that the Hebrews had of the book and the teachings of it, the more I read and study it, is really different than our understanding. It's just somewhat, it's different. It's really different. I don't want to get too far off on this because I'm still looking at this. I'm looking at the man, his wife, his household, the man and his household, the importance of sons, the importance of family. Let me say this: you cannot build a house without a family. You cannot build a community without families. You cannot build a nation without family. It all started with the nucleus. The nucleus was the seed of man and the family. The way that they understood the structure of a family, and then how you went from one generation to the next, and how the man was to find a wife and marry, and how some men when they grew and they had more substance. Let me say this: men wanted sons because back in the day when they were a nation and everything, when they would go into warfare, when they went into warfare, what did they do to those cities, those nations and stuff when they went into warfare? Anybody know what they did? They went into them. And we use the word that we talk. Oh, your child is spoiled. They spoiled them and pillaged them, which means they took all of their substance, everything that they had. They went in there. They took houses. They took everything that was in the house. They were told not to take. Certain times they were told to kill every man, woman, child, and beast. But everything else you could pillage and you could keep. So what men wanted, they wanted to have sons, because when they went into battle, now this is ancient Eastern, Near Eastern culture, when they went into battle, the more sons that they had to go into battle, the more what would they get? The more spoils they would get. So if you had one son that went into battle, he could only bring back so much. But if you had 6 sons that went into battle and everything they got came back, so your possessions and everything just kind of grew. And we even see with Jesse, how many sons did Jesse have? Anybody know? He had like 8 sons. He had 8 sons. They didn't talk about daughters. He had 8 sons. And all of them, he wanted all of them to be warriors. And you could not go off to war till you were 20. But they had a lot of training building up to that, to when they went out to go to war at 20. But that's just a ancient custom on how to build the family and how to grow what you had. And everything that was in your house belonged to belonged to the man or the head of the house. So you know where we get the word husband. I'm going off here, but let me just throw this out here. Where we get the word husband, well, hus, H-U-S, hus, comes from house. It's the house. So we say husband, but you can say house band. So he was over the house, but his responsibility was to be the band around the house. So he was the one to protect the house, to keep the house safe. All his children, and you see examples even with Job and his sons and daughters, and somebody else had tried. He was as he was the band around his house, how he would sacrifice for his kids in case they did something wrong. Was that Job? Okay, and how he was the band. He set the perimeter up around his house, and he had to keep it together. And that's where we get husband, but that's not what they called him back in that day. And even how Sarah called Abraham, Lord, I mean, he was over the whole house. He was over the whole house. He was over Sarah. He was over Hagar. He was over all the kids. He was over his servants. Didn't he say, can I have a seed through Eliezer? He's my servant. He's he's my chief of the house. I'm going to give everything to him. Most High said, no, you're going to have a seed. It's going to come through Sarah. I told you that. I'm not going to change it. But he had Eliezer. When they went out and they had the battle of the kings in the 14th chapter of Genesis, and how all of this was added unto Abraham. Do you know how many men he had with him that went out to war? He had 400 armed men that went with him to battle against those kings. And so they were able to bring back much spoil because he conquered all the kings. So they brought back he brought back more spoil because he had 400 men as opposed to if he only had 40. So we look at a kingdom where it's the people that take care of the king. But in our Father's house, it's the exact opposite. It's the king that takes care of the people. He knows how to be a husband. He knows how to, build and create and to enrich everything in his house. Because the way we look at it as in a kingdom, and especially you see it over there in England, it's the nation that makes them rich. But in his kingdom, he turns it all the way around. It's the king that makes everybody rich. Okay. I'm sorry to go off in the parking lot, but we'll get back to this. So you have sanctification, you have salvation from the penalty of sin, which is justification. You have salvation from the power of sin, which is sanctification. Then you have salvation from the presence of sin, which is glorification. Glorification. So you've got salvation from the penalty of sin, which is justification, just as if he didn't do it. You got salvation from the power of sin, which is sanctification, where he says, now sin shouldn't have no dominion over you. You're not brought under the power of sin anymore. If you're saved, if you have salvation, you're not under the power of sin, which means you're sanctified. When somebody is sanctified, they're not brought under the power of sin. Let's go to Leviticus chapter 20, and let's look at verse number 7. I'm going to read 7 and 8. Leviticus 27 and 8. Sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be what? Be ye holy. Now, didn't somebody else say that in the New Testament? We give it to, we say Peter says, be ye holy. Peter didn't make that up. That comes from the schoolmaster, which a lot of people say we're not under the schoolmaster. But that comes from the schoolmaster, because the schoolmaster says, sanctify yourselves, therefore, and be ye holy, for I, Yah, your Elohim, and ye shall keep my statutes and do them, I, Yah, which sanctify you. So when you're sanctified, you're no longer under the power of sin. It should no longer have transgression. Should not be a part of your game. I'm not going to transgress, because if I don't transgress against him, then am I holy? I'm holy if I don't transgress against him. Now, if you're transgressing against him, you ain't holy. I don't care how many songs you sing. It don't matter how many songs you sing. It don't matter what your title is. Don't put folks on pedestals, because if you're transgressing against him, you're not holy. You can't be holy and transgress against him. The power of sin, when he sanctifies me, I no longer have the power of sin on me. Another one, let's go to Isaiah 1, and let's look at verse number 18. Come now, let us reason together, saith Yah. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Now, this is more of the sanctification from the penalty of sin, because the penalty of sin is to be sanctified or to be saved. I'm saved from the penalty of sin. Now you're talking about justification, because all of us have sinned and what? Come short. I mean, all of us have. So do you think he wants to leave us there? He says, no. He says, come now, let us reason together, saith Yah. Though your sins be as scarlet, they shall be as white as snow. Though they be red like crimson, they shall be as wool. Now, listen to what he says in verse number 19. If ye be willing and obedient. If. So there's a condition. There's a condition on this. If you're willing and obedient, ye shall eat the good of the land. If we're willing and obedient, when he cleanses us or he justifies us through justification, then if I'm willing and obedient, then that's when he continues to load us. We get to eat the good of the land. Another verse in Isaiah, and I'm going kind of fast, but some of this stuff we're going to go over again if you didn't get it right away. If you didn't get it right away, because I'm moving kind of fast because it's almost 9 o'clock. Isaiah 43 and verse number 25. I like verse 24 and 26. Can we just read 24? I'm going to try not to say too much on that, but let's read 24, 25, and 26. Thou hast brought me no sweet cane with money, neither hast thou filled me with the fat of thy sacrifices. And I like what years ago, Sister Baldwin, what was her, I'm trying to think of, Bishop Jerry Baldwin's sister. She came and she preached that message here. You remember? Yeah, yes. Yeah, Sister Amy, I think it was Amy Baldwin. Yeah. And she preached that message on the greasy and the fat and what comes off that fat and how it was the anointing that came off that fat and how she talked. What was her title? It was something about, she was dealing with anointing, but and what the fat produces is that grease or that oil, which was the anointing, because he says the yoke will be destroyed because of the anointing. And from the sacrifices, and you'd have the fat on the sacrifices, it would produce that oil or that grease and stuff, and made it really greasy so that the yoke could come off. But he says here, neither hast thou filled me with the fat of thy sacrifices, because they weren't bringing the right kind of sacrifices. You could not just bring any sacrifice. And a lot of people feel that way when they present themselves before him. I can come any old kind of way. And you know who is guilty in that? Is our teachers and administrators, because we tell folks, come as you are. That was illegal back in that day. We do it here, nowadays, because people say, well, come as you are. It wasn't like that back then. Everybody couldn't get in the temple, but when you went before him, do you know that when they had their meetings and their meetup where he told the people, I'm going to come and visit you, we're going to meet up with you. Do you know that the husbands had to abstain themselves from their wives? They could not engage in sexual activity and then go to church or go into the temple. They couldn't do it. They had to wash themselves and be unclean for the evening. So for a 12-hour period from the evening, they had to be unclean and then the next day they could actually go. So men wouldn't even come at their wives. Where did they get that from? Well, when they came out of Egypt, and he told Moses, get all the people and sanctify them and get them ready to come up to the mountain. And he says, and no man come at their wife. And they remember he said that, and then you come up to the mountain, because you couldn't come before him right after you had sex. Now, to us, we don't look at that. Man, what is this dude talking about? I'm going to do what I want to do at home and everything. I don't care what you say. You couldn't do that to him. You could not do that to him. You had your time where you could do that and everything, but when it was time to meet up with him, you had to present your body a certain way. But we've gotten so far from that because people think they can just come up here looking any old way. Women with their breasts hanging out, wearing tight clothes, you can see the buttocks, skin tight. Not only women wear those what do you call them, spandex and stuff, and just show it like, I don't care if you're looking at me. Don't you know I'm free? Are you a hater? The Most High is. Don't think, y'all, see, folks play around too much. Don't think he accepts that. Don't think he accepts that. I don't care. We got leaders that said, don't you talk about them. I don't care. Either this book is right or you're right. And I'm going to take my chances with the book. I am. And a lot of times men say that because they don't understand how it was with the people. Because we don't even look at that. Most preachers don't even open up the Old Testament, let alone study the culture of the people, because they could not come in just any old kind of way. They had to present themselves a certain way before they came up. Even Jacob told them, change your garments, put all that stuff off, because we're going up to Bethel. You have to present yourself before him. This place ought to be a place that is set apart and sanctified. Hey, I'm getting ready to present myself before him in a place that we have dedicated as a sanctuary to where we're going to praise him, we're going to pray, we're going to sing, we're going to testify, we're going to hear his word. It is a place that is set apart. And you got some folks say, well, don't matter. You come up here in your kind of way. You come up here looking like a cheerleader with your little skirt on, bouncing up and down, and we can see your leotards. You know, and folks say, well, there ain't nothing wrong with that. You need to leave those people alone. No, you couldn't present yourself before the Most High like that. You just couldn't. And our standards have fallen. They've fallen. And a lot of times it's because we want folks. Now, once they left the temple, then they would dress their but you could not present yourself before him in just anything. And now some of us take it too far because we think our home is the church. Your home ain't the church. Your home is not the sanctuary where, you know, we honor him and this is everything is set apart for his use. Not your home, because you do all kind of stuff in your home. And you have that freedom to do that in your home. And women, husband can tell their wives, this is what I want you to wear at home when you're around me. I want to see you in this. I want to see, and they have the right to do that. That's his domain. He's the husband. Well, y'all gonna get tired of me. But we just have to know the difference between when I'm going before him and then when I'm in the comforts of my home and things. That there is a difference. But let's look. But he says, but thou hast made me to serve with thy sins. Thou hast wearied me with thine iniquities. That's what Israel had done. But did he give up on them? No. He says, I, even I, am he that blotteth out thy transgressions for my own sake. Not for your sake, but for my sake. I'm going to blot out those transgressions. And will not remember what? Isn't that remarkable? This is salvation from the penalty of sin, which is just as if I didn't do it. When he says he'll blot out my transgressions for my own sake and will not remember my sins, you mean it's just as if I didn't do it? Just as if you didn't do it. And Paul picks it up in Romans, I think it's Romans 5. We don't have to go there because I'm going to read it, but I think it's 5:1. We are what? Therefore we are justified by faith. It is his what? Gift. That's what he's talking about here. It's his gift. And he even brings it out. David brings it out in Psalms 32. Because in Psalms 32, he says, blessed is a man who's what? Well, let's go there. Okay. I'm going to read 26. My time, man, where'd time go? 26. Put me in remembrance. That's what I like about this. He says, put me into remembrance. Remind me. Now, remind me that I'll blot out your transgressions for my sake, not yours. And I'll remember your sins no more. Remind me. He says, put me in remembrance. Isn't this something? Let us plead what? Together. That's why he says, come, let us reason together. Hey, people are afraid of what's going to give them life. I mean, he says, come to me. He says, come, let us reason. He says, plead with me. Put me in remembrance. Now Jesus, you said you was going to forgive my sin. You're going to blot out my sin. You ain't going to remember them no more. That's not for you, because when we get to what Paul said in Romans 6:14, where he says we're not under the law but under grace, because we're dealing with you had to bring a sacrifice for your sins. Well, we're not under that anymore. So that's why sin shouldn't have dominion over us. There's no more sacrifice for sin. If he's calling for a sacrifice, none of us can do. There's no more sacrifice for sin. So he goes on to say, should we continue in sin that, because he says we're under grace, he says, do we continue in sin that grace may abound? No, 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 no. You have to stop sinning. You have to stop sinning. Just because you're under grace don't mean you just keep sinning. Anyway, he says, put me in remembrance. Let us plead together. Declare thou, that thou mayest be what? He says, declare thou that thou mayest be, is it up there? That thou may be justified. This is Isaiah 43:26. He says, declare thou that thou mayest be justified. Because salvation from the penalty of sin is justification. And that's where Paul was getting it from. Almost everything that Paul wrote in his letters, you'll find it in the Old Testament. Almost everything. It is the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament, that validates everything in the New. You can't have the New without the Old, because the Old validates the New. If there's something in the New that you can't find in the Old, then you better keep searching, or there might be some scripts missing somewhere, because everything that's in the New must be validated by the Old. So it's 9 o'clock, but the three things is salvation from the penalty of sin, which is justification. Salvation's from the power of sin. And we'll probably get more into the salvation from the power of sin in the next class, because and kind of remind me, because I'm just reading a lot of stuff, but kind of remind me, those are the three things we want to really look at. Salvation, first salvation, what I'm being rescued, I'm going to be delivered. I want to be delivered from the penalty of sin, because I know the soul that sinneth is going to die. I know the wages of sin is death. So the penalty of sin, how do I get saved from the penalty of sin? And that's what justification is. Salvation from the power of sin to where sin should not have dominion or power over us. Sin should not have power over you. I can't help it. I got the can't help it. I can't stop it. No, well, you're not sanctified. Because when you say you're sanctified, and everybody's singing these sanctified songs, I'm so sanctified, I'm saying, what you're saying is you're not under the power of sin. That's how I'm sanctified, because I'm not under the power of sin. And then salvation from the presence of sin. Because Jesus said, take them not out of the world, but what? Keep them from the evil. That's when you're glorified. That's the glorification. When the presence of sin, I'm saved from the presence of sin. I could be in the midst of devils. But if I'm truly glorified, that being in the presence of it doesn't trip me up. I'm saved from the presence of sin. And Paul even says in the first chapter of Romans, he talks about all of these things that got Israel in trouble, right? He talks about all these things, but at the end, he says, not only are they worthy of death that do those things, but what? The people have pleasure in them that do them. So, salvation from the presence of sin. I'm here, I'm in the world, but I'm not of the world. When you get to that place where you're in the world but not of the world, that's when you're glorified. That's the glorification. He could be glorified in me and be glorified in my body, because even though sin's all around me, I'm not desiring it. I don't want to be like it. I don't want to be like the world. I don't want to talk like the world. I don't want to act like the world. I know what my soul is. My soul is the totality of me, my character, everything about me, even what you see is my soul. And so even though I'm in the presence, sin is everywhere, but what glorifies me is it doesn't have no power over me. I mean, I'm here, I'm in the presence, but it's not controlling me. I am different from the world, even though I'm in the world. And that's when he's glorified in you. That's being glorified. So any questions or comments out there Any questions or comments? We'll talk a little bit more about it as we look more into the soul, and because we have to get to Hebrews, where we talk about this word and how quick and powerful it is. Because the whole book of Hebrews is tall. It's just one of those. I don't know. I get excited. Maybe you guys don't, but I just studying the word and everything. It's exciting. It's exciting. So, any questions or comments out there? If there's not any questions or comments, we'll talk a little bit more about this. And I do want to say before we go off, I do want to say that the council starts tomorrow. 24th, 25th, and 26th is Wisconsin State District Council. On the 25th at 7 o'clock, we're going to be here. I invite all the members to come out. 7 o'clock on the 25th, we'll be going live from the sanctuary here, and our live service will be broadcast on 3 different platforms for the Wisconsin State District Council. So I invite everybody to come out Friday at 7 o'clock. I also want to say that from the City of Davenport Public Works, they're going to start working on Marquette Street here in the month of July. And I think they're going to section off the east side of Marquette first. Probably one-way traffic on the west side of Marquette. But they're going to put a new road in from the railroad tracks. They just did the railroad tracks down here. If anybody's been across the railroad tracks, you know how smooth it is going across there. But going from the railroad tracks all the way up to 12th Street, we're going to get a new road in here. So it's going to take the month of July, August, and September. They want to get this whole road completed before the fall or October. They plan to finish up by October. But they gave me a timeline here and kind of what's going to happen. There might come a time where we cannot turn down on 6th Street or turn into our parking lot. That time might come. And then we'll just have to look at some other kind of parking that we'll have to do. Maybe we'll just have to reroute ourselves as we come down here to the church and get a different path into 6th Street as opposed to Marquette Street. So it might be inconvenient starting in the month of July, leading up to the month of October. And then also with that, we're going to be working on our parking lot back here. At the same time, they're going to be working on Marquette Street. So you're going to see a lot of construction going on around here. I don't know if we're always going to have access into our parking lot right here on the church. I don't know if we're always going to have access. But we'll monitor that as we go on. All right, with that, I'm going to say good night and grace and mercy and shalom to all of those who have been a part of this Bible class. I encourage you to come back on the Sabbath. We'll be teaching Sabbath class. And those who want to join us on Friday, we certainly will be going live Friday at 7 o'clock. And with that, I say Baruch haba Hashem Yahuwah.